All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining this academic conference of the GEF 2021. Is glad that we are able to have a parallel session this morning, with a very focused topic that we are all looking at. That is the future of academics, especially, and bringing together two projects that looks at multiple countries in the region, in terms of the experience of academics, in their experience when studying abroad and also when coming back to their home country. And also another project looking at the impact of study abroad, with a very strong focus also on academic staff in universities in the Southeast Asia region. All right. So today we have three panelists, three speakers who's going to share from different parts and different case studies from their project. We have the first speaker, Dr. Alia Kushaberkova from Nazarbayev University, who's going to share a little bit on a project that she's leading that looks at a comparative experience of the returning experience of academics who has been trained abroad in Kazakhstan, in Malaysia, and also in Cambodia. And then we'll have Dr. Naoki Yomiwa, who will be sharing with us more specifically on the case of Institute Technology Bandung in Indonesia. And we will have the third presenter, Dr. Madeline Ang, who is going to share also from the experience of academics who've studied abroad and also in Malaysia, in terms of their impact of the comparison impact of the study abroad experience in the case of University Science Malaysia. And without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to have 20 minutes for the presenters to share and present their findings, and then we will have a 10 minutes question and answer after the first presenter. And then for the second presenter, we will possibly have a shorter Q&A just for clarification, and then we move on to the third, and then we will have a longer one because the second and the third presenters is from the same project. So perhaps we will have a longer time so that we can also discuss, and then we will have a overall discussion at the end of the 3 presentation. So each presenter is 20 minutes. I will do keep an eye on the chat box. If you will shoot your time, I'll drop you a message on the chat box, so it will pop up to remind you when in the last 2 or 3 minutes, just for you to wrap up. All right, without further ado, can I invite Dr. Alia Kushabekova to start it off? Alia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Changda, for introductions. I'm really glad to see everybody. This is a very interesting panel, and I hope to learn a lot from everyone. Just wanted to say that I also hope that everybody is safe and healthy, and things are getting better in their countries, and we will be able to see one another face to face at some point. And I hope this will grow into something more than just an online conference. So I will talk about a project that's actually I conducted together with Changda, a colleague from Cambodia. Just a second, I will try to share the screen. Can you see the screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, you can see. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a project that was funded by Nazarbayev University, where I work in Kazakhstan, and it was conducted in collaboration with Changda and Kairat Moldashev, who is working at Paragon International University. The purpose of the project, so we looked at the transition experiences of returning scholars from Kazakhstan, Malaysia, and Cambodia. And we focused in particular on PhD students, as well as those who pursued their postdoctoral studies abroad. And we wanted to find out how they transition to research environment in their countries. So the purpose was to explore how individuals who receive degrees abroad transition to research environment in their home countries upon completion of their degrees. I'm not going to talk a lot about the literature behind. You're probably all familiar with this literature. However, for the purposes of presentation, the only thing I wanted to say to summarize about what we found out while reading the literature is that in general, prior studies tend to look at the process of reintegration as readjustment, where change happens only with the scholars themselves. So they come back, there's some fixed environment which has certain characteristics, and the scholars have to modify their behaviors to fit within this environment. And the behavior of the returnee is determined by the structure, the accessibility of domestic and international scholarly networks, research governance and funding structures, academic organizations, and cultural norms. However, based on my first grounded theory type of study that I conducted in Kazakhstan before this project, when I also tried to look at the reintegration experiences of Kazakhstani scholars, I kind of started to hear the discourse of the returnees where they show agency manifestations. And so when I interpreted the results, I brought in the agency theory. So something new that we are trying to do in this particular study, we brought in Giddens structuration theory, which argues that the structure itself is a result of, is not a mere coincidence. It doesn't appear by itself. It actually is the result of accomplishments of knowledgeable agents. And in other words, this means that returnees also have the ability to change the structure. And so in our study, we then ask 3 key research questions. The first one is, what are some common structural barriers and opportunities that all the returnees face across the countries? Then the second research question is, what are some common agency strategies that they utilize following the structuration theory? And then the third question is, what are some unique or different developments in the transition experiences in the three countries, not across the countries, but in these three countries. So we used, because we wanted to understand the central phenomenon in depth. In other words, we wanted to understand what is the nature of the structures that individuals face, and then what kind of strategies they use as agents. We use case study design, which is the most appropriate approach in this case. More specifically, we use horizontal comparative case study design suggested by Bartlett and Vavros, where we kind of try to see the manifestations of central phenomenon across three country contexts. The main method of data collection was interviews. In particular, we conducted 25 interviews in each country. We use maximal variation sampling to identify participants. So some of the criteria on which we varied them were the country where they went to study, the type of funding that they had, of course, the discipline, gender, and etc. Then we analyzed, the interviews were semi-structured and they were conducted in English. In some cases where individuals went to countries, non-English speaking countries, we conducted interviews in the native language of the country, in Kazakh, for example, in the case of Kazakhstan. And then we used theory-driven thematic analysis to analyze the data. And we sought only for service interpretation of results. So we didn't go into depth of trying to identify in-depth themes. Instead, we just looked at what the participants said in their own words to describe their context and to talk about their strategies. Then in general, there was a reason why we identified three particular countries. Of course, to some extent, it was the matter of pragmatics. We knew each other and we knew that all of these countries are in Asian context, but there were also certain reasons that made these three countries interesting for analysis. There were some similarities. So all of the three countries had some post-colonial past. It's Russian Empire and then Soviet type of arrangement in case of Kazakhstan, France and Britain in case of two other countries. Then all of these countries, to some extent, under the pressure of the innovation competition, innovation knowledge-based economy-driven competition across the world, started to make steps to implement active innovation competitiveness-based policies. And that led to reforms in higher education and in particular in the research systems in each of these countries. And all of these countries emphasize STEM education. At the same time, all of these countries at the beginning had lower levels of university research capacity, in particular lack of critical mass of local researchers, especially in the older generations. And at the same time, all of these countries pursued internationalization and international mobility as key instruments in the reform of higher education and intellectual capital development. In some cases, this strategy was implemented by government directly. That was the case of Malaysia and Kazakhstan, where the government would actually create scholarships to send students abroad to pursue PhD degrees. In case of Cambodia, it was mostly the initiative of international development agencies and sometimes universities. And finally, across all of these countries, and that will become important later in the process of analysis, there is a continuing influence of the social networks, informal social networks, or in case of Kazakhstan, it's clan system, in case of Cambodia and Malaysia, patronage system, on hiring, promotion decisions, as well as access to power and resources. So all of these countries are typical informal network-based countries, in addition to being bureaucracies. And then there were differences between the countries which justified their choice. In case of Cambodia, Cambodia has the lowest level of R&D expenditure compared with all of the other countries, mostly higher education based mostly on private institutions. And as I said, study abroad supported by external players, international development agencies, foreign universities, and etc. And research role of universities has only recently been recognized. In case of Kazakhstan, middle level of R&D expenditure, most of the higher education is based on public universities, and study abroad funded mostly by the government, and research started to play a really important role in higher education missions with increasing funding from the government and pressure to publish. And Malaysia is at the very top of the continuum. It has the highest level of R&D expenditure, almost equal number of public and private providers in higher education, and funding coming mostly from the government. And research has been playing an important role in higher education modernization for a long time, to the extent that there is a very strong publish and perish culture in the country at this point. So what were the results? With respect to the first research questions, what are some common structural barriers and opportunities? What we found is that in all of the three countries, when returnees come back, they have a very strong motivation to contribute, to change, and to conduct research. Meaning to change the research system, to become active researchers. But then they confront harsh reality, and that causes some disenchantment on their side. Some of them leave the higher education sector, but some soberly accept the reality and try to adapt. So some of the common challenges that they face, and that's across all of the three countries. Research environment, where research is very often perceived as secondary mission of higher education. There's emphasis on teaching, with the exception of Malaysia in this case, where research is becoming more and more primary mission of higher education. Severe underfunding, highly bureaucratized contexts, poor state of administrative research support. Secondly, in all of these countries, there's lack of research relevant social networks because on the one hand, because there's a very small number of local researchers, so it's very difficult for the returnee to build relationships with somebody else specializing in the same topic. At the same time, it's very difficult to build social research relevant social networks outside because there's lack of funding for going abroad, even for conferences, or to say nothing about short-term research visits, and etc. As a result, lots of the returnees experience isolation from international research community. There's also weak domestic research community, as I mentioned, and so most research exists in silos, where one individual may have a small, tiny research group, mostly composed of students, rather than other colleagues conducting research on the same topic. Fifth challenge is that lots of the returnees come back with some research capacity, but at the same time, these are junior scholars that require additional understanding of how to publish, for example, how to apply for funding, how to manage research projects, and they need some mentorship, and such mentorship is missing. Another important observation is that, so to avoid this problem, they start to involve in international collaborations, international projects, and at least in the case of Kazakhstan and Cambodia, we found that the returnees are prone to be exploited in international research collaborations, where they're degraded to the role of data collectors, and while they are partners from Western institutions in particular, or from international development agencies, not the agencies themselves, but the Westerners who serve as the primary consultants on these projects, they play a more important role, or collaborating international institutions send parachute Western researchers, which just collect the data using international returnees from the local countries. And then they are not involved in the process of data analysis. They are not involved at times in the process of writing manuscripts. In these three contexts, in many cases, research is oriented to practical, applied, and nationally relevant topics, and that constrains opportunities to get access to funding, and that makes some of the research, of some of those who conduct more fundamental basic research irrelevant for the country needs, and consequently more difficult to get funded. In all the three contexts in universities, career expectations and salary structures are often based on teaching and public service outcomes and performance indicators rather than on research performance indicators. And that demotivates some of the scholars to keep conducting research because their salary and their promotion do not necessarily depend on research. In all of the three countries, when the returnees come back, They are heavily involved in administrative responsibilities because they're perceived as knowledgeable assets for higher education administrators, and that distracts them from research. And finally, across all of the countries, individuals experience hostility from colleagues or other domestic researchers. At the same time, in all of the countries, there are some opportunities. There's high perceived value of foreign Western degrees, and that creates opportunities to get involved in government consultancy and international development agency consultancy projects. Very often returnees have a high level of satisfaction from teaching and sense of meaningfulness of their work because of respect from students. The second research question is, what are some common agency strategies? So across all three contexts, returnees try to overcome the lack of critical mass of local researchers by trying to build connections with students. So when they have access to master's and PhD students, they create their own research teams, they train the junior researchers to kind of create this critical mass around themselves. Second, they try to be actively engaged in, sometimes they try to be actively engaged in administrative duties or in policy developments to be able to influence administrators and to change the environment around them. Thirdly, they try to engage in international research collaborations, building connections with Western scholars, using them as mentors, and trying to get involved into projects with researchers outside. With respect to the third research questions, I won't talk about challenges because that's not as interesting. I will talk about some agency strategies. So in Cambodia, individuals try to engage actively in government, in policy making, in order to modify a research-related agenda. And sometimes this happens indirectly, where they do not necessarily interact with government officials, but they serve on consultancy projects with international development agencies and try to change government policies that way. I also came across one interesting case when I looked at the data is that one individual actually tried to create professional society, which was uncommon for other contexts because, as I mentioned, there's a lack of critical mass of other researchers. So it's in these contexts, it's impossible to very often to establish learned societies because you cannot base them on membership fees. Very often individuals don't have money to contribute to membership fees. But one researcher in Cambodia, which is the least resourced out of all of them, managed to mobilize his social networks abroad and social networks domestically and established Comparative International Education Society branch in his country and even managed to conduct a conference. In Kazakhstan, instead of establishing these professional research societies, what the junior scholars did, and that was because majority of them were located at Nazarbayev University, which is a highly resourced, world-class status aspiring research university. What they tried to do, they tried to get organized, irrespective of the discipline, and to establish a Junior Scholars Association. And then they used the platform of Junior Scholars Association to network with other junior scholars and other universities in the country, and then to create their own agenda to influence policymakers. At this point, they actually managed to get support from the Ministry of Education. And by now, I can report that they even managed to change the system of distribution of funding. They managed to create a special research grant for junior scholars. So it's not necessarily a learned society, but it is a way of mobilizing and influencing research governance in the country. In Malaysia, so far what I saw is that sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes this, so for example, one of the strategies that being used with the research grants being cut severely at the time when individuals receive the money, some try to increase the amount of money that they ask or to distribute the money that they ask across the variety of items. So when the research funding is cut, they still have the amount of money that they need to conduct research. Sometimes, and that's questionable, they may send their publications to bad journals, but in any ways, they don't necessarily play with the system. They try to go around the system to be able to still conduct research. In Cambodia, the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malaysia try to trick the bureaucratic system in order to comply with the discourse of publish and perish. And so sometimes the researchers in Malay So in other words, they are torn between the need to conform to the local culture or they remain frustrated. So going to the discussion, and I have only 2 minutes left, that's probably enough. One can say that existing structure creates many integration challenges for returnees, but the returnees at the same time are very often perceived by the society as change agents, and the society is ready for them to implement certain changes. As a result, they're capable of modifying the structure to fit their research needs. And from a practical standpoint, looking at the results across the 3 countries, for societal expenditure on education abroad to have higher rate of return, structural barriers needs to be addressed. And some of the key approaches that were recommended in all of the 3 countries by the participants themselves, and they are clear to us from the data, is that it's important for funding agencies that provided the scholarship for individuals to go abroad, and in particular for governments who provided scholarships, international development agencies, to offer some sort of startup grants for individuals. Also to offer funded mentorship schemes so that the scholars could continue their relationships with scholars abroad. Also support networking initiatives among returnees, so support probably alumni associations, and engagement of PhD students in research projects during their to make sure that returnees continue to have connections with research networks in their countries. It's important to provide some sort of support so that students, when they do their PhD abroad, continue to have relationships with scholars in their own countries and start to build their social networks before they even return. And finally, for collaborators from abroad, for international collaborators, whether they are within the international development agencies or foreign institutions that collaborate with local researchers, it's important to be aware of the potential for exploitations and take measures which are known in existing research already to avoid such an exploitation. I'm done, thank you.
Thank you, Valia. Thank you for, I know there's a lot from this research to be shared in this very short space of 20 minutes. I shall not ask any question because I'm also part of the team. Open for questions. Any questions, any clarifications? Anyone has additional inputs and ideas?
Chanda, I have a question to ask you. Am I supposed to write it down, or may I ask it in?
You can just ask it. Yeah. Because it's a small group here, I don't think we need the chat.
Alia, thank you for your presentation. I'm Munira from National University of Malaysia. First, I'd like to ask, did you divide your research into researching the social sciences and humanities and the sciences? So what is your data? Where is your data from? Because you will find that there are differences between the disciplines. Secondly, you mentioned patronage as a problem, but how does it fit in terms of the barriers and the opportunities on returning scholars? Also, the last question is, did you look into the role of these scholars on returning outside of academia in terms of their role in the public? So what is your research? How does it highlight the existence or the lack of public intellectuals? Thank you.
Thank you, Munira. These are all 3 wonderful questions. With respect to disciplinary differentiation, yes, when we interviewed individuals, we actually used field of specialization as maximum duration sampling criteria. So the goal is at some point to see the differentiation between disciplines, but we didn't get there yet, unfortunately. In fact, we are still in the process of analyzing each individual country case. So these are probably preliminary results at this point, but I think it will be important to look. On the other hand, reading the transcripts, I wouldn't say that in terms of the challenges that I mentioned, there would be difference in terms of disciplines. I can imagine that there are some differences in terms of challenges between disciplines that I haven't discussed, but the ones that I mentioned, I'm pretty much sure that they are experienced by everybody who comes back, regardless of the discipline. With respect to the second question, social networks, I can tell you from the context of Kazakhstan. What happens in Kazakhstan is that when individuals come back and they try to land the job at the university, there is a clear distinction between two generations of scholars. The old generation of scholars who were educated in the Soviet Union and who achieved a lot during the Soviet times. So they still dominate local academia because there are many of them and they occupy all of the top positions as scholars, not necessarily as administrators, as scholars. And their reputation is based on many, many publications that were made not during contemporary times, but in the Soviet times. And so these are the ones who control PhD students because they are in top ranks, they have access to PhD students, and they also they used to sit on the National Research Council, which distributes funding. So, and they play an important role in hiring decisions. So when the junior scholars come back from the West, and these scholars, they actually have a very strong reputation in the country because they most of them receive funding from the government. There's a government scholarship, which kind of positions them in the country as change agents. And of course, this old army of researchers, they don't necessarily want change because that will come with a loss of power. And so they start to put all sorts of barriers for these junior scholars not to receive funding, not to get access to PhD students, and not to even get hired by universities. So the main reason why scholars at Nazarbayev University, who are mostly returnees, started to create Junior Scholar Association is to counteract this old army of scholars. And I can tell you that they managed to do that. So by now, because of the noise that they made at the Ministry of Education, because they mobilized all of the junior scholars in the country, they actually overthrew the old National Research Council, and the membership has been completely changed. So I am now the member, like as one of the returnees, I am the member of the National Research Council. They also change expectations in terms of promotion. So you actually need to be published in international journals and have impact factor to get to any sort of influential position. Of course, the old army is still there, but they are less powerful these days. And this happened not because of the growth of learned societies. This happened completely differently as a result of mobilization of junior scholars. And then that leads to the third question. The third question, in our study, we actually intentionally didn't interview anybody who is outside academia because our interest was how do returnees who come back to research roles change academia. But then what the experience from Kazakhstan suggests is that indirectly, when they cannot achieve things, they actually get mobilized and they try to influence policymakers anyways. But also in other contexts and in the context of Kazakhstani universities that, not Nazarbayev University, but other universities, very often once they come back, they are involved in administrative positions. So they become center directors, they become consultants, directors, and once they get access to the ear of university administrators, they manage to change both university level policies and at times even government level policies. That doesn't happen overnight. That requires maybe a couple of individuals to break through, but that's the whole, theoretically, that's the importance of our finding. They are like returnees, even if they come to the worst of conditions like Cambodia, they still manage to change the structures. They have agency capabilities.
Thank you, Alia. I actually needed to clarify my last question. What I meant was returnees who are still attached to the university, but play an active role outside of it with civil society. I think Changda would understand. For instance, my role, I engage with the public via the media, engaging in academic activism, so to speak, while still remaining in the university as an academic? So that was my question, but thank you for your answers.
Thank you. I think I got your question at this point, but maybe this happens, but it wasn't as clear in our interviews. I mean, thematically, first, I probably was not looking for that when I analyzed case of Kazakhstan. Maybe Changda noticed this in Malaysia, but we didn't notice this as a theme. Maybe because we asked different questions. We asked them mostly about their research activities versus academic activism.
Maybe just let me add on to what Alia has shared. I think specifically to the case of Malaysia, in terms of the role of academics moving out of into public engagement and being public intellectuals. The main constraint we saw from the narrative of the participants was that it's generally not encouraged because of a very strong culture that emphasizes only on research. So anything else outside of research, you are basically discouraged from doing. So and most of the returning scholars actually shared not only frustration in terms of not being able to engage with the public and to play a bigger role, but actually there is also a lot of frustration within the university system that is discouraging, for example, academics in terms of putting more effort into teaching and supervision. It becomes very mechanistic kind of thing when it comes to supervision and teaching, and there's also a lot of frustration that many of the returnees were talking about, because it's very different from what they experienced and what they actually went through and being prepared in the foreign in their doctoral experience. So there is a fair bit of frustration more at within the university system on the non-research activities, and increasingly that also discourages many of these academics to even venture and do things that is outside of their research and outside of the university.
You know, to add to this, now as I'm thinking about the context of Cambodia and Kazakhstan, both are post-authoritarian type of countries with lots of ideological control. So in Kazakhstan, with most of the universities being publicly funded and controlled by the government, I don't think academics are at the stage yet where they can really get engaged actively into civil society. And I can imagine in Cambodia, it's probably the same.
Yeah, definitely. The ideology also plays a role. Any other questions for Alia? We can keep some of the questions for the general Q&A after we finish the three presentations. I think we have a bit more time at the end of that. And perhaps it will be interesting also to listen to the other two presenters who is going to go a little bit more focused into specific university cases within in Indonesia and Malaysia. If there's no burning questions for Alia at this point, let's move on to our second presenter. Can I invite Dr. Nalki Umamiya to share with us the paper on the case of ITB in Indonesia? The floor is yours, Nalki.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Wan, and very good morning to everyone. I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Dr. Wan and the organizer for inviting us to make a presentation about our study. We are very happy to have this opportunity. This is going to be a joint presentation of three of us, myself, Umemiya from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA in short, and Dr. Kayashima from Japan International Cooperation Agency. And we have Dr. Yudi from Institute Technology Bandung. And we're going to talk about the preliminary analysis result of our study on the study abroad experience of academic professionals in Indonesia. And this is a part of a bigger project. And I am going to explain a bit about the background of the study first. As we all know, we have been seeing the internationalization of higher education, which has been leading to increasing number of international students. And even before that, we know that many of the highly skilled professionals, such as government officials and academic professionals in developing countries, studied abroad. And now we have, hold on a minute, this SDG goal number 4. We have the target of the number of scholarships available to developing countries. So we are trying to promote the increasing number of scholarships for professionals of developing countries to study abroad. And it has been said, or it has been believed that study abroad contributes to development of politics, economies, culture, and science. And it also influences bilateral diplomatic and international relationship. But there are a few studies on impact of study abroad, particularly on development. That's why we decided to launch this research project, which is to study the impacts of study abroad in developing countries. So it's a empirical research on impacts of study abroad experiences of academic professions of major universities on individuals, universities, and societies. And it's a project of JICA Ogata Research Institute with partnership with, in partnership with 10 target universities in 4 countries in ASEAN. We have Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And these are all the universities, 10 universities involved in this research project. And 3 of us, we are in charge of Institute Technology Bandung, or ITB in short, in Indonesia. And this is how we're going to collect data. We have done this basic information gathering about ITB, and then we have done this questionnaire survey to faculty members. So today we're going to present the result of a preliminary analysis of the result of this questionnaire survey to faculty members. And after this, we are planning to do some interviews with the selected faculty members and the government university officials in the coming month. So now let me describe a bit about the questionnaire survey at ITB. We have done this questionnaire survey in December 2019, and there are around 1,400 academic staff in total. And out of them, 9 to 5 faculty members, so it's around 66% of the total responded to the questionnaire survey. And there are 899 valid responses, including both those who studied abroad for their master's degree and or doctoral degree, as well as those who pursued their degrees in Indonesia. And this is the distribution of the respondents by gender. And blue is abroad, and orange is home, so male and female. And this is the distribution of respondents by faculty, different faculties. For example, we have business management, we have pharmacy, we have life science and technology. These are in the faculty composition of the ITB. Then this is the distribution by different age groups. So we have young ones and we have senior ones. And again, blue is those who studied abroad, and orange is those who studied home. And as you can see, the senior ones, more senior staff studied abroad, while junior ones, more junior ones studied in the country of Indonesia. And this is a distribution by rank. We have different ranks, professor, associate professor, lecturer, and so on. Okay. And this is the distribution by destination country of study abroad among those who studied abroad. And the most number goes to Japan, just about 160, followed by US, Australia, Germany, France, and the UK, and so on. And now, so far we have done some analysis of these responses in order to compare impact of study experiences between the two groups. The first group, those who studied abroad, and the second group, those who pursue their degrees in the home country, in terms of the followings. One, development of their skills and consciousness, enhancement of education-related activities, research-related activities, society-related activities, and management-related activities. So we have asked them different questions in these different categories. So let me go through them one by one. So the first category is skills and consciousness. Okay, and we have asked this question, to what degree has the master's doctoral study experience, either abroad or home, enhanced the different conscious skills and consciousness, such as consciousness of your national identity, consciousness as a member of Asian regional community, or consciousness as a global citizen. So those questions, and the question was asked on scale, 4-point Likert scale, with 1 to a large degree, 2 to some degree, 3 little, and 4 not at all. So for example, if you look at this consciousness of your national identity, so this blue is abroad and orange is home, those who studied home. This is the mean of their responses. So 1.177 is the mean of the responses from those who studied abroad. And if the number is, the figure is closer to 1, which means they think their experiences had a sort of positive impact on enhancement of this particular consciousness of their national identity. So as you can see, on average, those who studied abroad think their study abroad experience had a positive impact on enhancement of this consciousnesses of their national identity. And we have done some t-test, and this is the result of t-test. So just to summarize, these are statistically significant difference between the two means of the two groups. The first groups staff who studied abroad, and the second group, staff who studied in the home country in every question. So staff who studied abroad, on average, answered their study experience, enhanced their skills and consciousness more positively than staff who studied in the home country of Indonesia. And then second category, impacts on education-related activities. So the first question we asked, do you think your study experience enhanced your skills and knowledge in dealing with the different education-related activities, such as development, revision of education programs, development, revision of courses, and so on. And again, we found there's a statistically significant difference between the means of the two groups in every question. So staff who studied abroad on average answered their study experience, enhanced their skills and knowledge in dealing with these education-related activities more positively than the other group. The second question we asked about the education-related activities. We asked if they conducted the following activities in the past 5 years. We have different activities in terms of education. Again, here, development of revision of education programs, for example. But so this this question was asked by yes or no. And this is the percentage of those who said yes to the particular question. So 80% of those who studied abroad said yes, whether they have done this particular activity of revising education programs. And we don't find a big difference between the two groups in those activities here. But then if we look at the other activities, for example, here, conducting courses in foreign languages, we found more of those who studied abroad said yes to this particular activity, about this particular activity. And the other red circled activities, again, we found there's a big difference between the two groups. And interesting, these are all so-called international activities. So in all the international activities, which were circled in red in the previous slide, the proportion of staff who answered yes among those who studied abroad is higher by 10% point or more than that among staff who studied in Indonesia. Okay. Now, third category, research-related activities. And we asked the same question: do you think your study experience enhanced your skills and knowledge in dealing with the following research-related activities? And we have different, okay, thank you, Dr. Chang. I have 5 more minutes. As you can see, for some activities, we see some differences. I mean, a gap. For other activities, we don't see big difference. And just to sum up, hold on. Oh, doesn't work, sorry. Again, these are statistically significant difference between the means of the two groups in most of the questions. But as for applying for patents, actually staff who studied in the home country on average answered their study experiences, enhanced their skills more positively. And there is no statistically significant difference between the two groups in some activities about these research-related activities. And we also asked if they conducted the following research-related activities in the past 5 years. And again, we found there is a big difference between the two groups in terms of international activities, such as making presentations at academic conferences overseas and so on. So that's we found in terms of the research-related activities. And now, third category, society-related activities, such as contributing to domestic academic societies, contributing to international academic societies. And we found there's a difference for some activities, but while there is no difference for some activities. So there's a statistically significant difference between the means of the two groups in all the international activities, again, in terms of the society-related activities. And the last one, sorry, I have to skip these slides, is about the management-related activities. And there are 4 different management-related activities asked about, such as contributing to reforms in regulations or systems at your university. And these are the result of t-test. And again, 3 out of 4 activities we found there's a statistically significant difference between the two groups. Okay, so let me skip this to go to the conclusion. So overall, we found their study abroad experiences had a positive impact in many aspects in terms of these following 5 categories, such as development of their skills and consciousness and so on. But obviously, this is still a very preliminary stage, and we would need to do further analysis in different aspects, such as we want to look at differences in impact by age or rank or country of study abroad destination or field study. And we also want to look into factors that promote these differences. And we also want to do cross-university comparison in Indonesia, because there are 2 target universities in Indonesia, ITB and also University Gadjah Mada, UGM. So we are doing a similar survey in 2 universities. So we want to do the cross-university comparison. And finally, we also want to do the cross-country comparison among the 4 countries in ASEAN. And for that, we are planning to do further interviews with selected faculty members in addition to this questionnaire survey. So that's the end of my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Naoki. It's open for short question and answer. Any question, any clarification?
Changda, I'm sorry, I'm
yes.
the same one asking questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Naoki, you showed us a graph about where these students were going to, and the largest number of students abroad were in the US.
To Japan?
To Japan, sorry, and followed. I noticed that to the Netherlands, it was 5th or 6th, a former colonial master. Now, I'm not sure if, myself, I'm not sure of the statistics, but there's a high volume of Malaysian students who go to our former colonial master's country, which is the UK. So can I just get your feedback as to why Japan and not the Netherlands is? I think I have the answer in terms of economics and development for the region, but can you contrast it with other countries that who might be sending their students to the former colonial countries for study? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very important question. I might want to ask Dr. Yudi later on to complement, but if we look at the destination country of their study, by different timing, I mean, in the past, many faculty members went to Netherlands, but gradually the number decreased, and at some point, US was the big destination. And then after the, let's say 1980s, latter half of 1980s, more faculty members started to go to Japan. And one of the reasons is probably the country's relationship, bilateral relationship between Japan and Indonesia. It has started to be stronger. And there are many different projects between the 2 countries, and including higher education programs in which there are scholarships available for faculty members to go study in Japan. But may I invite Dr. Yudi to add something?
Yes, thank you for the occasions. That's true in a sense that the number of the destinations country for is mainly, I would say, depend on the economic ties and academic ties nowadays, and the trend from the 90s up to now. I think the most of academic ties mostly in the universities in Japan. So that's why the starting from the 90s to nowadays, there's the largest number of the faculty member who have experience in graduate studies in Japan. But your question is actually very interesting about the number of the faculty members who studied in the Netherlands, because yes, in terms of numbers, there's not so many faculty members who studied in the Netherlands. There's always some of the study there, but not so many. I think that's as a function of the number of scholarship available. I think that's it's the most important factor in this case. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you, Dr. Naoki and Dr. Yudi. Let's move on to the third presentation from Dr. Madeline Ang on the case of University Science Malaysia, and is also part of this JICA project. 20 minutes, Dr. Ang, and the floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
A very good morning to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Wan, for the introduction. Today I'll be presenting this research project similar to what our ITB counterparts have presented. It's a similar one. I'll be presenting on behalf of the research team in USM, namely consisting of members like Prof. Dato' Murshidi Shirat, Dr. Wan Chanda, and also Mr. Sharifuddin. So these are the findings, and we're going to see it from the USM perspective. So I'm just going to skip the first few slides. Okay, so the aim is the same. We wanted to see the impact of studying abroad or studying locally on various aspects of academic life. And we have this 8 broad categories of variables of interest. We are looking at communication, consciousness, education-related activities. As you can see, some of the terminologies are similar to what Dr. Umemiya has presented earlier on. So, but we have these 8 broad categories. So data were collected using online survey, a similar survey that has been used by our counterpart in ITB. And we took about 5 months to collect data from the month of February to June 2020. Okay, these are the demographics of the respondents. Actually, we managed to only sample 30% of the total population in USM. That gave us a sample size of 592 respondents. And of this sample size, we have about 55% of respondents who studied abroad and 45% who studied in Malaysia. So in terms of gender, we have more female respondents than male respondents. 46% male respondents, 54 of them were female. And at the time of the data collection, these respondents were predominantly in the age group of 36 to 40 years old. So probably in their early and mid careers. Yeah. And that's why the positions that they held in the university are mainly lecturers or senior lecturers. And they came from medical, dental, and health sciences background, majority of them. And when we looked at the two different groups, those who studied abroad and those who studied locally, the demographics are quite reflective of the whole sample. Okay, as you can see, there were also more female than male respondents for those who studied abroad and locally. Again, they were relatively young, 36 to 40 years old, and also the same as their positions, academic ranking, mainly lecturers and senior lecturers, and also they come from medical, dental, and health sciences background. So, but this is quite interesting in that sense that when we look at whether they did hold any university manager position, out of those that studied abroad and locally, we managed to see that those who studied abroad actually helped, more of them actually helped university manager position at the time of the survey as compared to those locally. And we also went on to ask them what are the top reasons for their study location, meaning that why do they choose to study abroad and why do they choose to study locally in Malaysia? So these are the top reasons for those who studied abroad. The first reason is they think that the disciplines and in foreign countries are more advanced, so therefore they chose to go abroad. For the local graduates, they cited affordability as one of the top reasons. Affordability in terms of the cost of study and also cost of living. For the second and the third reason, the same, scholarship availability, recommendation from their own university or from the supervisors. Then we went on to ask them, what would be your top 5 study destinations if you were to go pursue your degree again? So for those people who studied abroad, they listed these 5 top study destinations. UK was top, followed by US, Japan, Australia, and Germany. For the local respondents, who studied locally, UK also was topped, followed by Malaysia, Australia, Japan, and US. So we asked them the reasons for the choices, and the abroad and local actually for the first 2 reasons similar, more advanced discipline, value of degree. And but for the third reason, those people who studied abroad cited the reason because they like the country. For those local graduates, they say that they see it as an opportunity to improve their language proficiency. So then we came to the analysis of the data that we collected. Now, we did not do what our counterpart in ITB did. We actually treated the whole, the variables of interest as a global dimension. And we wanted to see whether there are significant differences between these groups on these dimensions. So what we did was we divided the respondents into 2 groupings. The first one is very broad grouping, local and abroad, those who studied in Malaysia and those who studied abroad. For grouping 2, we actually divided these based on their postgraduate education pathway. So whether they studied locally for the master's and went to abroad for their doctoral and so forth. So there's a combination of local and abroad or local. So for grouping 1, we wanted to see whether there are significant differences between the 2 groups. We performed statistical analysis, independent sample t-test. Grouping 2, one-way ANOVA. And this is what we found. Yeah. In terms of communication, that measures, whether they maintain close communication with their former supervisors, their faculty members upon returning, we found that those people who actually studied locally have reported that they maintain closer communication, of more frequent communication as compared to those who studied abroad. And you can see it is highly significant. The differences between the 2 groups are highly significant. And we wanted to see whether this, what is the effect size of this difference, So we computed this eta square, and that gave us a value of 0.65, which means that it's a medium effect size. And the same goes with the grouping 2, we can also see there are significant differences. As long as they have some abroad experience, they will probably fare lower than those who studied abroad. So the second variable of interest is consciousness. Yeah, consciousness is actually measures whether their experiences enhance their consciousness of national identity as a member of the Asian regional country, as a global citizen, and their appreciation of cultural diversity and knowledge about the host country. So this time around, we found that those people who studied abroad, there are actually significant differences between the two groups, abroad and local, but those people who studied abroad reported that their abroad experiences actually helped them in the terms of the level of consciousness. So as you can see, the eta value, effect size, it's moderate again, 0.54, highly significant differences between the two groups. The same also for the grouping 2. Okay, for the third variable of interest is education-related activities. This actually measures whether the experience of studying abroad or locally enhance their skills, knowledge on developing, revising education program, teaching materials, so forth, and develop new teaching methodology. Again, there are significant differences between the two groups. Abroad actually reported that their experience enhanced their skills more as compared to those people who studied locally. And it is also highly significant that the differences. Eta square is also moderate, 0.61. Yeah, it's quite similar again for the grouping 2. For research related activities, again, similar findings. We found that this group of respondents who studied abroad actually reported that their experience enhanced their skills and knowledge on making presentation and academic conferences, publications, collaborative research projects, obtaining research grants, or even applying for patents. So there are significant difference at 1%. Eta square, or the effect size, is also moderate. Okay. And in terms of administration or leadership, or what our ITB counterparts has labeled it as management-related activities, it's the same, yeah? So here we found that the two groups are significantly different, but only at 5% significance level. But what is interesting is the effect size is large. According to Cohen's guideline, 0.88 is a large effect size. So abroad seems to say that their experience enhance their abilities to contribute to reforms in regulations and system, and as USM, as administrative member, contributing in international and inter-university networks and so forth. Okay. And capacities and attitudes, we do find, again, these two groups, abroad and locally, are significantly different. However, the effect size, it's only small effect size based on the eta square of 0.59. Okay, so these attitudes and capacities actually measure whether their experience enhance their motivation towards educational research, ethical mindset, capability to work as a team or manage research teams. Okay. Finally, current work. Okay, we asked them whether their experiences, either overseas or locally, will impact on their current work in terms of supervision, tutorial, independent research, group research, societal activities, and even volunteering. We found that at 5% significance level, it is significant between the two groups. Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, I think I probably said the wrong thing just now. Yeah, at societal engagement, actually there was no significant difference. Okay, so this is a summary of the findings. In terms of, we are comparing these two broad groups, local and abroad. Communication for local graduates actually reported that experience actually enhanced their ability to maintain close communication with their supervisors and the faculty members. But abroad, no. So the significant difference is of medium effect size, and consciousness medium, except for societal engagement. We couldn't find any significant differences between the two groups. So, but for administrative and leadership, we found there is large effect size. So there are significant differences between abroad and local with large effect size. Capacities and attitudes small, current work is medium. So that's all for me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah.
Open for questions. And yes, Naoki, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have a few questions for Alia. I found your presentation very interesting. Thank you very much for sharing your research project. The first question is about the interviewees. Do they belong to, I might have missed it, but do they belong to one particular university in each country, or do they belong to different universities? And if they do belong to different universities, do they belong to different types of universities? Let's say research-oriented university as well as education-oriented university. I thought their experiences would be different depending on a type of university. The expectations for them in terms of doing research, in terms of doing education would be quite different. So I just wonder if you find these differences in terms of, depending on different types of universities they belong to. That's the first question. And the second question is about the last point you made in the last slide as a conclusion. You mentioned that there's a potential of exploitation by international collaborators, and I would like you to elaborate a bit more about it, as I think it's a very important point. What are these risks, and how you think we can avoid them? That's the second question. Thank you very much.
Before I pass to Alia, let's any clarification question for Madeline on the Malaysian case, and then we will go and have this as a more general discussion across all three presenters, right? Any clarification questions for Madeline first?
May I ask one question?
Yes.
The difference, thank you, Madeline. Your difference in the administration and leadership roles of academics who studied abroad, you mentioned there was a large difference. Now, as a political scientist myself, I think I tend to understand the relationship between politics and our public universities. Can I just get your feedback as to whether this aspect plays a role in the leadership roles played by returning scholars? Your comments about politics and its role in USM. I mean, you don't have to be specific, but is that a factor that you would consider in your analysis of these statistics? Thank you.
Madeline, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof, for the question. Right, in our analysis, we actually didn't look at the elements of politics, political influence and all that. But the other day, we had a discussion among Dr. Wan and Prof. Murshidi Sirat. You know, we're talking about this graduates who studied abroad, those abroad graduates, when they would probably have more, the likelihood of them holding top management positions are much higher than those who studied locally. So when we look back at the top management in USM alone, we can see that this is proven to be true. The top management in USM, actually, those people are actually studied abroad, and none of them actually studied locally, at least for their doctoral degree. So this is based on the discussion that we had the other day. Yeah. And in terms of political, yeah, it could be, for me, this is just my humble opinion, it could be true in that sense. It has an influence on how you get appointed. I'm not talking about USM specifically, but based on my previous university, if you are actively involved in one part, or you're an active member of a political party, the likelihood of you getting promoted or even, holding the top management leadership will be higher in that sense. Yeah. Yeah. But we have not looked at that. And maybe Dr. Wan or Prof. Rushidi would like to comment further. Thank you.
Can I maybe just add on to that question? I think we also have to factor in what Madeline has presented is just from the survey. And we also have to factor in the fact that the survey do not specifically target any particular groups of respondents. So it could be because the older generations, most of them are actually trained abroad. And these are the people currently holding positions of leadership and administration in the university. And therefore, it tends to be, there is a higher possibility of those who have been abroad holding on to positions of leadership and administration. We have not managed to look specifically into this aspect at the moment. And we also have conducted interviews with some of the respondents who have indicated their interests to be interviewed. And we are still going through analyzing the interviews on that. But that is certainly a point that we will look into, especially in terms of the influence on the study abroad experience on leadership and administration. All right. Any other clarification question? If not, can I invite the three presenters together and everyone in this room? First of all, thank you to the presenters for sharing part of your research that actually has a lot of commonality, although it's two different projects. And perhaps I think Naoki's question has really got us started, especially the second question on some of the possibility of some of the interesting, more nuanced discussion on this. Maybe I'll let Alia have a go on this, and then we can have more questions that discuss across these three presenters. What they have presented, and also to actually look at the larger questions of experience of studying abroad and the state of academia in the university at the moment, right? Alia, you may want to respond to those questions first, and then I'll open the floor for more questions. Yeah.
So with respect to the first question, again, we didn't, since it's preliminary stage of analysis, we didn't look at the differences between institutions, but we did include individuals who work at both teaching and research-oriented universities, and also those who are at private and public universities, so quasi-private. Based on the experience from Kazakhstan, what I can say is that, as I mentioned, there's a lack of critical mass of researchers with PhDs from abroad. So when they come back, they tend to accumulated research-oriented universities in case of Kazakhstan. And in fact, in Kazakhstan, they try to get a job of some sort, whether it's faculty position or research assistant, even position at Nazarbayev University. But I did try to differentiate so that I don't have only Nazarbayev University representatives. Other individuals, about half of the individuals were from national level public research universities, which are not world-class type, but which are still research intensive. The problem is that the environment is such that most of these universities in the post-Soviet, in the Soviet Union, research was not the main function of universities. The main function was teaching. So we are now at the point where some of the universities are transitioning to become more research-oriented, but in general, the main responsibility of faculty members is to teach. And that's why their performance evaluation structures are based on teaching performance, not on research performance. And very often when individuals conduct research, they do it voluntarily, trying to kind of thinking about the future and thinking about the changes that are happening in the country. With respect to the second question, we didn't see we didn't have many participants complaining about exploitation in Malaysian context, but we did have this in Cambodia in particular and in Kazakhstan. In Cambodia, what we found is lots of these returnees, because they are not in demand by the government, they are not as much in demand by the university, and at the same time they have the research capacity, they are engaged in consultancy projects by international development agencies, by donors. And so very often when they are engaged as local experts, so that there's always an international expert who is the main PI of the project, and they kind of use the local experts mostly to collect the data. So when the individuals give the interviews, the quotes that emerge is that, well, there are always these Western parachute researchers that come, exploit us, use us for data collection and leave, and we never hear about the project after they are gone. So, and we heard a number of people mentioning this. It can also take place in international research collaborations. So when individual engage, like let's say, he goes to a conference, he identifies some typically Western scholar who comes, who is interested to conduct comparative type of study, and they start some sort of international collaborative project. They may also end up in the, and this is the post-colonial type of, is the legacy of post-colonialism, where probably individuals from colonial countries with lower research capacities tend to be viewed as lacking research capacity. In Kazakhstan, different thing happens. So we heard about this. I actually wrote a separate paper about that, about the role that Western educated, internationally educated scholars play as both agents and at the same time victims of colonization, Western colonization in academia. Because on the one hand, and we are talking about the case of Nazarbayev University here, on the one hand, the university was created to replace the international scholarship that sends individuals to study abroad. And it was created with the assumption that we now have enough scholars to actually become faculty members of the university and to teach others how to become scholars. And so originally, at the early stages of the creation of the university, local scholars educated abroad were actively involved in creating the university. But then in the course of time, somehow this discourse of Western scholars being better trained and better prepared to be faculty members, having more experience with research, started to dominate. And now the policies have changed. And that was partially because the administration at the university is predominantly Western. So somehow this discourse crept in, and now it has become very difficult for internationally educated individuals to get a job at Nazarbayev University in research positions. They can get hired as administrators, but not necessarily as researchers. And so they cannot even get postdoctoral positions. Now there is a discourse, especially in sciences, that in order to be a postdoc, you need to be essentially all of the Bolshak students are not qualified because they're funded by the government and they never get engaged in research when they go abroad, and they're less experienced than a prototypical PhD student that got admitted themselves. So they come back, they get discriminated, then they cannot get the job at the local university because of the pushback from the old generation of researchers. And that's exactly what led them to sort of not activism, but that made them mobilize, because they try to, but their role as agents of colonization is that the way they play out, the way they become powerful is by presenting the discourse that all of the, like what they are trying to do now, they are trying to become the second, like, you know, if best are the Western scholars, then we are going to be the second best. So they are trying to convince the government that it's important to introduce publish and perish type of indicators, that they are trying to push the old generation down using the Western discourse, you know, and as a result, they bring in the Western system and all of the standards that may not necessarily make sense, and they are themselves the victims of the same system, sort of. Yeah. And when we ask for recommendations, how things can be changed, I didn't hear many, like, I don't remember many recommendations exactly how to address this problem, mostly concerns. But I think even if you provide startup funding for individuals to start their own projects versus becoming dependent on this international collaboration and trying to attract research, grant funding from abroad, which is expected in Kazakhstan, for example. And again, you can't apply for Western funding because you're not in the West. You are discriminated in that respect. You need always to have this more experienced researcher to be a PI to get from the West to get a research project. So if within the countries you provide funding for scholars to be able to do their own projects and to be able to fund their own trips and to invite Western scholars on their projects, the ones that they want, maybe that it will empower them. Other than the typical recommendation, because most of the if you make this kind of change, that gives agency to the scholars themselves, versus the typical recommendations that you can see in journals that, well, all of these Western scholars, when they start international collaborations, they have to be cognizant of that. They have to share responsibility. They're never going to do that. So make the scholars agents themselves to be able to make changes. Thanks. I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you very much.
Dr. Yudi, sorry to let you raise your hand for such a long time.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Just a brief clarification of the destination country. The data they showed by Dr. Memia earlier, that's only from ITB. And the data from ITB is a science and technology university. So it is maybe slightly biased of the country of destinations. Later on, when the data from University of Gajah Mada is a comprehensive university with a lot of body of the humanities studies, then we may get a better view of the country of destinations. This is the only information there with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Any questions or discussions? We are open for more questions, for more discussions across the three presenters.
Okay, since there is no discussion yet, can I just mention something about, you know, this research project is very valuable, I think, and looking into scholars who go abroad, pursue their postgraduate studies or master's and PhD and return. Of course, in Malaysia, the situation is different in terms of the role of politics in universities. I suppose you see, the problem that we have is that we have a situation where the public discourse is very distrustful of academia and of scholars. Specifically, the attack on scholars who go abroad, get a foreign degree, come back, and perform badly. So the disconnect is, so-and-so has a degree from Oxford. Why is he or she performing this way on coming back? So the discourse, I think, that should emerge from this research is that, is getting a foreign degree actually a deciding factor in the contribution that scholars make to societal development? This is part of the analysis of such a good research that all of you are carrying out. The need for going abroad to get a degree and coming home, as opposed to developing the quality of our own universities at home. And then a whole lot of discourse will emerge from that, how to upgrade our local university system and all the contributing factors into why it isn't up to standard. So, I look forward to more, to the expansion of this research project, because I think it's very valuable, and I'd like to congratulate all the speakers for that. Thank you.
Any of the speakers wants to respond to that? Maybe let me share a little bit on this, and definitely I see value in bringing these two projects together, because not only that I have my foot in both of this project that is happening concurrently, but the work that is coming from these two projects seems to be converging onto some very important and very interesting trends and parallel developments that we can see from this. Definitely the tension is there, as Munira rightly pointed out. That tension on, is it necessarily that we continue to do this, sending people abroad, and what is the kind of expectation and contribution when they return, as opposed to developing the local capacity. And from the Nazarbayev University study, we can see that it's definitely there is this tension that is constantly happening between especially people going abroad and coming back against the local influence and local culture. Definitely this is a point to be considered as these projects move forward. I think all three projects are still it's not cast in stone. It's still an ongoing project of analysis and also on reflection on the findings at the moment.
Excuse me, Dr. Wan, this is Kayashima. Yes. May I say something? I'm sorry, I couldn't find the button to raise a hand. Sorry. Dr.
Kayashima, please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. This is Kayashima. I'm a member of the research project of JICA with a partnership of 10 universities in ASEAN. So it means I am a member of the research, which was presented by Dr. Umemiya and by the researcher from USM. As it was explained by Umemiya, this is the international collaborative research project conducted in 4 ASEAN countries with 10 universities. So we are still in the process of the data gathering and data cleaning. But at the end of the data cleaning, we can compare the different destination country, the host country, and disciplines, and timing. And so at that time, we hope that we can find out more clearly the factor which affect the output of the study abroad, especially in terms of the university development. So in the past, there are many research projects or outputs which explained about the impact on individuals of the study abroad. But since there are so many scholarship programs provided by donor agencies or international agencies, etc., for the purpose of the development of the society or for the development of universities or the development of institutions, we would like to find out that impact. We hope that in some future occasions, we can present that output of the analysis of the different universities or countries. At that time, we can see more clearly what factor affects what aspect of the faculty, the university teaching staff functions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kashima. More questions, more comments?
Chanda, if you would allow me, I want to actually respond to the comment by Munira about what is the better approach for us to invest in our own universities or to send individuals abroad. And as you noted, this question, it modified policy in Kazakhstan at some point, because in the early days of independence, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and lots of, like, Kazakhstan was very multi-ethnic, and lots of the higher education professionals and technical specialists in general, they were not necessarily of Kazakh ethnicity. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, they left the country, and we had a major deficit in well-educated specialists, and especially and also in people who could take leadership positions. So the government created this scholarship that in the course of time became a prototype of a really good government funded program with a good return rate and good economic impact. But at some point, the government expanded it to bachelor students. And when students started to come back, it realized that students actually lose connection with the native culture and with the reality, and they don't understand the context of Kazakhstan. So that was the rationale for creating Nazarbayev University. That's how we got into the idea of having our own world-class research-intensive university where the former Bolashak students at upper levels can teach. But now, if you look at it, the model that's used is that, I think the benefit of sending individuals abroad was that the country sent students all around the world. So we had students educated in Asia, in Europe, in North America. And when they came back to Kazakhstan, they brought all sorts of ideas about how to reform the country. And some of them landed business positions, some of them landed government positions, some of them worked in social sphere. But they brought ideas from around the world. And in some ways, Kazakhstan was developing its own unique solutions to problems. Unfortunately, universities were also changing. They were just changing slower than other spheres. And now what happens is that with the establishment of Nazarbayev University, which by the way receives about 60% of government funding for higher education, like major funding, major support. The idea is that this university will set example for changing all of the higher education system, and it's already happening. The problem with Nazarbayev University, it was established with a set of international partners. So each school has a partner, and most of these partners, with the exception of School of Public Policy, where the partner is Lee Kuan Yew University from Singapore, all of these partners are Western partners. And to clarify, mostly UK and US. So what happens now is that with international faculty and administrators being hired mostly from these two countries, we don't have the variety of ideas anymore. So we predominantly have one model, which is a mixture of US and UK model implemented in the country. And now the whole higher education system is changing only in one direction. And I don't know whether it's good or not. I think we were able to avoid post-Soviet colonization, academic colonization for a long time. And we are now getting into it because Like in the previous presentation that I made, we really have Cambridgeization of educational system in general, not only higher education, it's overall educational system where only one model dominates. I don't think that's good, but that doesn't mean that you cannot invest in universities. And that probably answers your question too. Yes, you can invest in your higher education system, but whether the idea of investing in a small number of universities is a good idea, I don't necessarily agree with that. Maybe like seeding across all of the universities, like seeding into developing one department within the whole university that would set example for the rest of the university, or putting universities in a competitive environment where they compete for grants, for changes, would be better than investing in like one world class or a set of research intensive universities. But that's the argument, like where your economic resources are, whether you have the money to invest across the board, or it's better to give the money to the individual. But then the problem is when the individual comes back, they are disempowered because they cannot integrate with the structures. Or if you invest a lot and then you support networking, then they will themselves get mobilized and will change the system. I don't know the answer, but that's the experience from Kazakhstan.
And I remember Alia and I had many conversations while we were there, talking about this is also possibly a trend of recolonization of the universities from a different domain, and then that actually has vast implication as we look at the experience of the returnees going back into the system. And that heavily influenced what actually counts in terms of the experience and how, in terms of helping the returnees to actually fit into the local system. Because what counts in terms of societal contribution, for example, may have already changed with the different development that's happening within the system. There's any other questions, any other points, comments?
I actually have a question to the other team, whether you had the chance to collect any qualitative data or to invite participants to participate in follow-up interviews.
The quick answer, yes, Alia, yes, we do have interview sessions in the case of USM. We have so far done about 20 interviews. Maybe Naoki wants to respond further on that.
Yeah, thank you. For ITB, we haven't done the interviews yet, but we are planning to do it with the selected interviewees in the coming month. Thank you.
What I wanted to say is that, of course, because we didn't conduct a survey in Kazakhstan or Cambodia, we cannot compare our cases with your cases. But once you get to the point of analyzing qualitative data, depending on what kind of research questions we ask, I think it might be possible to do something like broad across the two projects. Would be interesting to do that.
Yeah, I very much agree with you. That would be very interesting. And to respond to Dr. Marisha Munira is a very encouraging comment. I think we should look into how, as Dr. Kayashima mentioned, how we can improve the outcome of the returnees after coming back from their study abroad. We have so far looked at only like means of responses, but obviously among those who studied abroad, some of them are successful, others are not. So what are making the differences among them, so that if we look at that, we can see how we can improve the outcome of their returnees in the future. Thank you very much.
You know, in terms of your analysis later, all the projects, the factors, I think in one of the slides, someone mentioned academics working in silos. This is an issue of those of us who have gone abroad have experienced the foreign academics and scholars engaging more in interdisciplinary studies. Now, in Malaysia, in our system, we do pay lip service to interdisciplinary studies or research. Our classes, our syllabus, we're encouraged to be a little interdisciplinary. But my feeling is that I don't think those of us who even have gone abroad actually understand what interdisciplinary means. Within the social sciences itself, we are psychology. So I would say that your research, part of your analysis may bring up this issue of how interdisciplinary are the scholars who return, and whether being interdisciplinary has an effect on starting changes for development in society. You see, we have this problem of irrelevance of our research. How relevant is the research? Are the universities contributing to development in society? So this, I don't know if I'm making sense, but the aspect of interdisciplinary research might come up, or maybe you can consider in your analysis if that is an important factor to be cognizant of. Thank you.
You know, I can again comment from the experience of Kazakhstan. I mentioned that one of the strategies that the returnees use, they established Junior Scholar Association, or Junior Scholar Young Researchers Association, and when I asked them why don't you establish research society of some sort, the answer was clear, because there is not critical mass of other researchers with whom they could collaborate locally. So that's why they started to unite based on the fact that they studied abroad. And then, of course, the ultimate goal for all of them was to publish and to do research projects. And they understood that they cannot, they thought they cannot do it by themselves, so they need collaborators. And they tried to find topics that they share, and it was very difficult because you have one physicist, one chemist, one geologist, and they are not even coming from physics from different branches. They come from completely different disciplines. And the pathway they identified for themselves was, we need to become interdisciplinary. We want to do some projects that have applied relevance to Kazakhstan, that has higher chances to get funding from the Ministry of Education, and we'd better do it from an interdisciplinary perspective. Of course, take into consideration your comment that none of us, very few of us were trained as interdisciplinarians, because that's not the field that's typically funded by the government scholarships. Then how can you do that if you don't have experience? And also, given that lots of interdisciplinary journals are probably lower in rank and are not going to be counted in promotion, evaluation, and other decisions. They don't give you what the policymakers expecting from you or university administrators expecting from you. I don't know where this will go, but I know that there are conversations about interdisciplinary projects.
Yep, definitely. That's one direction that is leading to a very important area of what counts as research and what whole research eco-culture, the ecosystem and the culture of within the system. We have a few more minutes, and any last comments, last questions for the presenters, and more specifically for the two projects on study abroad. and the impact of looking at study abroad. Yes, Miki.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. I just to say thank you very much. Actually, I'm also the member of JICA Research Institute, this project. And today, finally, I could compare the Indonesian case or the Kazakhstan or Malaysian case. And thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. Actually, I also had a presentation in the room once, so sometimes I jumped in and jumped out. So sorry not to comment at this moment, but if we can compare this kind of the wonderful, maybe returning the scholars, this point is very important when we think about the real opportunity and function and significance of studying abroad from now on. And now the COVID-19 has suspended the student mobility, but even so, this kind of the mobility issues should be a very important topic to our international higher education sector. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the IPPTN, Dr. Chandawan, Dr. Professor Morosity, and your colleagues. Thank you very much for wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, can I invite all of us to turn on your camera? Let's take a group photo of this room. All right, everyone. Duga, you're taking the photo, right?
Dr. Sidi, I'm still waiting for a few more to switch on their camera. So that's about Dr. Nur Azrin, Nur Rashila,
Prof. Mushidi.
So a minute more for everyone to switch on the camera.
All right, Duga, over to you. You to take the photo and then. Duga, you need to unmute yourself. Are we done?
Okay, done.
Yep. You have an announcement, Duga?
Yeah, for those who are staff of the USM, I'm going to put in the link, the QR code link for the CPD point in the chat box. So just go ahead to get the CPD point from there. Otherwise, we are good to go.
Okay. And thank you for that. USM staff, take note of in the chat box. There's a QR code for the CPD points for your participation this morning. And once again, thank you very much, all of you, and especially the three presenters, and also the collaborators of these two projects. It's a pleasure to have all of you here to discuss this very important topic on the study abroad experience. All right. Thank you very much and have a good day. You can take a break. The next session will resume at 11:30. You can also feel free to come in and look at which breakout rooms. It's the same thing. There will be 4 breakout rooms in the next session that will start at 12 o'clock. Am I right, Duga? 12 or 12:30? The next session will start at
the next session starts at 12:30.
It's 12:30. All right. Sorry, all right, at 12:30, and then the third session will start at 3 o'clock.
3, that's right.
All right. I'll see you all, and take care, everyone. Stay safe. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.